contending for faith. That's what it is. We're fighting for faith. And so, again, the whole theme we've had each time is all of us go through something in our life where we have something specific we struggle with. And the question invariably comes, whether we say it out loud or it stays in our mind, of, if God's really for me, if he really loves me, why does this stick around? Why do I struggle with this? Why did this tragedy happen in my life? And more than that, when we meet other people who have had similar struggles, or maybe what we might consider worse struggles than us, the question becomes, why do you still believe in this God who's so good, who's so kind, who's so loving? Why do you believe when we have all these advances in technology and we live in the 21st century? Why do you continue to believe? And so each week, we've had different people who share, this is why I continue to believe. This is why I've continued to fight the fight for faith, because it's real. God's proven himself over and over again, despite these hardships that may never leave me. They may stay with me to my dying day. So tonight we have Danielle Anderson. We're so grateful to have you, and she will be sharing her story as she's fought the fight for faith pertaining to loss of loved one, loss of life. So Danielle, thank you for your time. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me this evening. As Morgan said, my name is Danielle Anderson, native of Texas, but have lived in Atlanta for the past 5 years. I live here with my husband, Tadashi, and 3 sons, Jaden and Kai. I'm the proud mom of 4, but you will see me with 3, and you'll hear more about that in my story tonight. I recognize that people often have live out of burnout sometimes. I have a passion for the whole health of people, that we, by God's grace, would pursue whole health, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, as we pursue him, so that we might live a life that is good for us and to God's glory. So tonight you're going to hear my story of loss and suffering, and the things that I've learned in what I call the elementary years of the school of grief. I'm 7 years into my journey, and I hope that you will find encouragement. I hope that you will be pointed to hope during this time, and I hope that you might even come to give your own self permission to grieve the losses that you have experienced. So, because I'm passionate about whole health, I am a fitness instructor, and yoga is one of my specialties. I actually want to just take a moment to do a little bit of breathing before we start, because this is a heavy story, and I want us to have our mind and heart settled. And so we'll just do about a minute of a little bit of contemplative prayer, which actually is an ancient monastic practice, a practice that monks would use. And we're just going to pray as we breathe. And I want you to pray with me and just call to mind this one word, and the one word is heal. So if you would join me, please close your eyes. And as you take a deep breath in through your nose, tell yourself heal. And as you exhale out your mouth, or maybe out your nose, recite the word heal silently. It becomes a prayer, like we're begging God to do some healing. I don't know where you are today, but I know I could use some healing in my life. Breathe. Lord, you are here with us. Lord, I know you hear our cries. Would you make yourself tangibly felt? Would you make your presence known? And would you help us to feel your comfort and to feel the healing that you bring? God, your word says that you are the God of all comfort in 2 Corinthians. And so I pray right now for each person who is on this call that you would be that and more for them. Would you meet them in their spaces of loss? Would you meet us in our spaces of grief and longing? And would you do what only you can? In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So I entered into what I call the school of grief in 2013. It was March 23rd. It was a Saturday morning. And 2 days prior, at the time I was the mom of 2, Jaden, who was 3, and Chase had just turned 1 on March 14th. And 2 days prior, on Thursday, Chase started to have a fever and was just acting not like himself. And so I kind of got on my whole health regimen, was giving him lots of vitamins and like different homeopathic supplements. And the next morning on Friday, he ended up waking up with a very high fever. So I rushed him to the emergency room and they checked his oxygen levels and they checked him. They ran different tests and they said he was fine. Just take him home, give him lots of fluids, take notice of his breathing. What also happened on Thursday is that my husband, Tadashi, left for a show. Tadashi is a hip hop artist, and so his primary job involves a lot of traveling. So he had left on Thursday for a show. Saturday morning, Tadashi is still gone. He was going to be gone for 2 days. He had 2 shows back to back. Saturday morning, wake up, Chase is awake, I'm playing Jaden, and Chase is acting more like himself. I'm so grateful. He is laughing and he's slobbering, which he was so prone to do. And it was just a good Saturday morning. I was feeling really good because a lot of my natural supplements and just efforts to hydrate him and keep him warm and keep him cool, all these, or keep him cool really, I thought they were helping because he was acting so much more like himself. So around 10 o'clock in the morning, I laid him down for a nap and I went to the kitchen table to just talk to one of the girls who lived with us. An hour later, I went back into his room to wake him, to give him fluids, because I was doing that every hour. I'd wake him up. And when I picked him up out of the crib, he didn't open his eyes. And I used to always love to see his eyes open when I picked him up from a nap. I just loved the drowsiness on his face, and I loved almost the irritation he would show on his face. And I was looking for that, and I didn't see it. So quickly, terror starts to set into my heart. I screamed for my mom, who had driven in the night before to be with me and just to help care for Jaden as I was caring for Chase. And I asked her to help me see if his heart is beating, because at the time my heart was beating so fast, but I couldn't discern his heartbeat from mine. I leaned my head to his chest and listened for breath, but just couldn't tell. So my mom leans over him and she says, "I don't hear a heartbeat," and his lips are cold. So we quickly scramble into the living room and I perform CPR. Someone who's there sweeps Jaden upstairs to play. Someone else calls 911. Soon an ambulance arrives and I just kind of in a fog walk out my front door barefoot and follow these EMTs who are carrying Chase onto an ambulance. So in the ambulance, they're doing all they can to get his heart beating, because I don't think his heart is beating. And I am doing my best in the back of the ambulance to fight off terror and to kind of keep my composure, knowing that my son is gonna need me. And I'm thinking to myself, Lord, I'm praying, Lord, would you heal him? Bring his heart back, help his heart start again. Give me the grace and the strength to raise a brain damaged son, because I knew it had been a long time since oxygen and blood flow had, been to his brain. So we get into the hospital, we're in the emergency area, and they're doing all their resuscitation, methods and attempts, and nothing happens. And I remember looking at the clock, and it was at 12:17 p.m. A woman comes up to me and just says, "I'm sorry." I scream, I belt out a huge, loud wail, and I go to give Chase a kiss on the forehead. And my mom is with me. And at some point, one of the hospital workers starts to usher me away from that space. And I remember it happened too fast. I wasn't ready to go, but she started pushing me away kind of towards the chapel and started asking me all these questions about Chase's age and insurance and date of birth and all this stuff. And at some point she says, "Do you want to call your pastor?" And I told her yes. And I guess in a blur, we called our pastor. We lived in Denton at the time, so I called my pastor, Bo Hughes, of the Village Church. And then sometime after calling Bo, somebody reminds me that I have to call Tadashi. So as all of that chaos was happening that morning, Tadashi was actually on a flight coming home. And so he didn't know what was going on. So when he landed, I think my mom told him to, when you land, text me. So we'll know that you've landed and I can be hopefully the first person that calls you and you hear it from me. And so I had to make the most horrible phone call of my life and let my husband know that our son Chase didn't make it. And it was just a blur from there. He has his own story he can tell about his experience on the airplane. But eventually we do meet back up at the house, and we both kind of just collapsed in each other's arms. And that was the first time I actually let myself cry, was when I saw him. There was something about, I felt like I needed to wait for Chase's dad before I could break down, because we were parents and we had lost our son. And there's all kind of things wrong with that. I remember thinking, and I still do think, like, you're not supposed to see the beginning of someone's life and the end of their life. Especially as a mom, I'm intimately aware of the fact that Chase came from dust, the dust of my own body. And then 4 days or 5 days later, I had to watch him be returned to the dust when we had to bury him. We ended up having a private burial service for him where only close family and close friends were invited. And it was just a really, really horrible experience. After the burial, we had what I like to call a celebration service at the church. Funeral still sounds real, just too heavy for me. So I call it a celebration service, where we celebrated Chase's life, and we encourage people to wear aquamarine, which is what I call Chase's life stone. It is the birthstone of March, and March 14th is his birthday, and March 23rd is what we call his glory day. So at the celebration service, we encourage people to wear aquamarine to celebrate Chase's life. In the days and weeks to follow, we were forced to learn a new normal. All of the busyness that had existed when people came to the house and we were trying to plan arrangements, all of that noise and all those visitors, they stopped, and life got real silent real fast, and it hurt a lot. But we had been encouraged by some parents that we had got a chance to speak to a week before, parents who knew a similar loss, who had lost their 6-month-old 3 years prior to our loss. They told us, you're not going to like it, but you're going to have to learn a new normal. And so we fought as best we could to learn that new normal. We had to get used to dealing with only one child and having to strap only one kid into a car seat, putting only one son to bed. And that was excruciating. It hurt. One of the things I remember thinking on my way back from the hospital was that I'm now the mom of one. And it was actually the mom of the couple we had a chance to meet with that knew that similar loss. She encouraged me and reminded me, you are the mom of two. Two aren't here with you at the time, but you are still, Danielle, the mom of two. So we continue to fight for a new normal. We tried to fight for health. We tried to fight to deal well with our sorrow and with our grief, but we didn't know how to do that. So it was a lot just kind of fumbling in the dark, it felt. We went to counseling a month in, and our counselor told us from jump, marriages don't make it through this. So if you don't mind, I'd like to focus, part of our time on just the health of your marriage, and, will y'all make it through? We were encouraged to grieve together as much as we could, husband and wife. And we found that to be really, really hard. I did what I like to call leaning into the waves of sorrow, where there would just be these really high waves that would come crashing down on me. And rather than avoid them, I would just lean in and ride the wave. And I would break down and I would cry. And I just gave myself permission to do all these things in real random spaces sometimes. I broke down at a Beyonce concert at the American Airlines Center in July, 4 months later. I broke down in the seat of a dentist's office 9 months later. I broke down at a dinner table at P.F. Chang's. But I had to let myself grieve, and I didn't want to be afraid of the emotions. Now, unexpectedly, in April of that year, I found out I was pregnant with my third son, Callan. We had a lot of mixed emotions about that. We were mad and angry and confused, but also excited. But initially, I didn't want Callan. I didn't want this baby. I wanted Chase. I wanted my Chase back. But I guess God had written our story a different way. So because I was pregnant with Callan, I remember someone encouraging me, probably my midwife, what's going to be best for you and baby Danielle is that you allow yourself, you give yourself permission to feel emotions. So I think that's where I got that push to lean into those waves of sorrow. But Tadashi obviously wasn't pregnant, and he didn't have a similar push to lean into waves of sorrow and to let emotions flow through him. He actually found avoidance and numbing sometimes as his, what I like to call, drug of choice. So we struggle to grieve together. When his version of grieving includes avoidance and mine includes diving headfirst and doing all things chase, smelling his old diapers, smelling his clothes, sitting by his crib, looking at his pictures, it's really hard to grieve together. But somehow, through God's grace, we were able to, I guess. We grieved. We're still here. 7 years down the line, we're still married. We both are in counseling. We had marriage counseling together for a season, and now we're both in individual counseling, and we'll be joining back into marriage counseling soon. We both had our own different journeys in this space, in what I call this school of suffering. And I think the Lord has taught me a lot of things through this story. One thing that I feel like I knew but didn't know how much I needed to know was that God is good and that God is in control, and that circumstances don't change that. It was actually at Chase's celebration service that Tadashi shared a quote from a man who had lost his wife. And the man said, God was good in giving me her, and God was good in taking her away. Now, I want to make sure that you hear what I'm saying. I did not say that it was good that God took her away. What he was saying is that God was good. He was still good in that moment when his wife passed away. And so I had to try and anchor into the fact that even though I do not understand it and that I could not explain it, I did know and I did truly believe in my heart of hearts and in my mind that God was good. I did not know how those two things existed, how I could say that God was good. And I could also say in the next sentence that my son passed away. I don't know how you say that, but I was able to, and I'm still able to. I do believe that God is good. I also had to learn about the difference between God allowing and God causing. And I think one of the reasons I've been able to hold on to faith in this season, the past 7 years, and in the 7 years and 7 years plus on and on to come, is that God is not the author of evil. I've had to remind myself, I had to learn there's a difference between God causing and God allowing. Someone defined, or someone told me about God and his wisdom. And they had this picture of God in his wisdom. It's almost like not a filter, but a sifter. That God only allows things to touch his precious loved ones that he allows to sift through. And that, again, that was hard to understand too. Like, well, why did God allow that to be sifted? Why did he allow that to touch me? I don't know. And I really wanted to know. I really wanted a succinct 1 or 2 statement or phrase that was where I could just say, the Lord allowed my son to pass away because blah, 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 blah. Or the Lord chose to write our story this way because of X, Y, and Z. But the Lord didn't give me that. And the Lord is not going to give me that. I don't expect it anymore. I've had to come to grips with existing and living in some unknowns, and resting again my confidence in the fact that even though I am limited and I am not all-knowing, I can rest in the fact that God is limitless, and he is all-knowing. The Lord allowed something to be sifted through his hand of love to touch me, to touch my husband, to touch our family, that we were not expecting, that we never would have asked for. But he did, and he loves me through it. He is still good. He was still good on that morning when Chase took his last breath. Other things that brought me comfort in this season, really is just the fact that I do believe God is real. I do believe his word. I do believe that Chase is with him. I believe that Chase skipped the line. A friend of ours at the private burial spoke, and he said that like when you go to Six Flags or some amusement park, there's a really long line, and we're all trying to get to that amusement. And Chase got to skip the line. He got to skip the line and go straight to the kingdom, to go straight to be safe in the arms of the Father. And that was really hard to embrace, but somehow it did bring me comfort. Months later, I'd read an article by John Piper that he wrote to a mom who had experienced the loss of a son through a miscarriage. Well, really a stillbirth, actually. And he writes in the letter that when you get to heaven, you will see your son, and your son will recognize you. Your son will know you. And this is the part that gets me. I have it on a picture on my nightstand. And your son will thank you for enduring the pain so that he could have the reward soon. I believe that. I believe that Chase got the reward sooner. And there's a part of me as his mom that is willing to endure this pain on this side of heaven so that he can be okay, so that he can have the reward. Now, like I said, I've only been in this school of suffering for 7 years. I have a long way to go, have a lot more to learn. I have embraced that this is part of my story, that this will forever be a part of me, that this experience has marked my soul. I don't expect it to go anywhere, which makes me not want to hide it. I want people to say Chase's name. I want them to talk about him and remember him with me. I want people to send me pictures of him. I want people to validate his life. And so I will be that mom who gets up as often as I get the chance to let people know I am not okay. This journey of grief and restoration is a process. Do I feel like there has been some healing and that I've grown in these past 7 years? Yes. But do I think I'm done with the grieving process? No. No. And I don't know why anyone would expect me to be. Why would anyone expect a mom, a parent that has lost a child to one day be done with that? To one day move on from that? That's not an option for me. So what I've chosen to do instead is to walk this life missing my son, walk this life like I'm missing a limb. I choose to walk this life falling and collapsing into the Father's arms as often as I can, feeling my emotions, leaning into those waves of sorrow, beating on God's chest in frustration and in all my emotions, while knowing that he's the best place for me to be. So that is my story. That is where God has taken us. Like I said, 7 years in, my hope is that I would be able to cling to hope each and every day. One of my philosophies or things I tell myself, and I started this way back, probably on March 24th, 2013. Lamentations 3 talks about how the Lord's mercies are new every morning. And so I resolved back then, or at least I tried to beg him by his strength to give me the power to do it. I tried to wake up each day looking for those new mercies. And then I tried to exhaust them. I tried to just live that day off of that day's new mercies. And I would go to sleep confident that there would be new mercies for me tomorrow. Because there are definitely times where it feels like I don't have any strength. All I've got is the energy to make it through today. And so that's where the resolve came from. I'm going to exhaust these new mercies. And then when I wake up, there'll be some more. And I'll exhaust those. And I've been walking that day by day, moment by moment, exhausting new mercies walk ever since. Thank you.
Danielle, thanks for sharing. Curious, just for you, as you were sharing this, what were some of your feelings as you were sharing this with all of us?
Oh, mixed feelings. I could definitely feel my heart rate elevate just because it's, it brings back so many memories. But there also really is like as a parent who has lost a child, you have the ministry that no one wants. And so I'm grateful and I get excited at the chance to try and pass on some of the comfort that I've received and the hope that I've had to cling to. So definitely is a gratitude as well while sharing.
Well, we're going to introduce some of our other, we have some panelists here, and we have the Sherwoods, have Chris Sherwood, and then Ben and Laura Davis. And so we'll have Ben and Laura, if y'all maybe just kind of share briefly, just, while you're on this panel, and then we'll kind of shift just to some, if you're listening in, if you have some questions, go ahead and type those into the chat or the Q&A spot. But I certainly have some questions that will kind of get us moving. But Davis, is maybe if y'all just kind of share, let's put y'all in this panel.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Danielle, for sharing your story. Sweet. And we're here because last August we lost our daughter Haven Sky at birth. At August 26th, not at birth, still birth. It was a few days prior to giving birth, to be exact. And we've been in this grieving process for since the end of August, and I can relate a lot with what Danielle was saying. Is it comes in waves, and you just have to take it when it comes. For me, it's been at different times, and the most recent was, obviously Father's Day was this past weekend, and we it's hard to be with one child is a great blessing with that is, but to know that his sister's not here is just a hard time. But did experience joy in the midst of the suffering of it all. But yeah, so it's been a hard road, and it for me it's been very intermittently in terms of the intensity of the grief. Has come at different times. I think I won't speak for Laura, but maybe she can share a little bit about how it's been with her.
What are we supposed to share?
About why
I'll definitely come back with that, Laura, just because we definitely have some questions for you to answer for sure. So just grateful for you guys being on here, and so for the Sherwoods, just for you guys, as far as kind of what's put you on this panel.
Yeah, thanks for having us too. And so what put us here on this panel is, what was it, 2017 or 2018?
May and October 2018.
Yeah. So we got pregnant for the first time in May of 2018, and ended up experiencing a miscarriage about before the first trimester was over, and so that was really, really awful. And then we were grieving a lot of that, and then in the midst of all of that, we ended up getting pregnant again in October, which we both, and I know you have other questions, but we'll probably dive into this more later, but just the grief of it all was so hard that we were like, man, we're pregnant, but we were kind of like, we don't think this is going to go well. And sadly it ended in the same sort of story. So having those two miscarriages in 2018 is kind of what put us here tonight and got us on this panel.
Yeah. Well, first question, I'll ask you, Danielle, and then kind of field it through. I want to hear from the Davises and then the Sherwoods. So one is just, did you feel the freedom to express your anger and disappointment towards God?
Absolutely. Yeah, we were really angry. I was very angry. Chase actually was what I called my miracle baby, because he was the baby I birthed after having two miscarriages. And that was really, really weird that God would give us him and then take him away. didn't understand that. So yeah, there were a lot of screaming fights with the Lord. There was a lot of cynicism, I think, that Tadashi experienced, and just like, you lie, you don't, your word is not true, God. How can I trust you when you did this, when you let this happen? So we had to work through a lot of that. But one thing I think we were able to do with the encouragement of friends and a close friend who at the time, she has like a nature resort. She was like natural stuff. She just constantly told us to feel. Let yourself feel. If you're angry, let yourself feel the anger. God can handle it. God can handle the questions. He can handle the emotions. I think there was a little bit in my mind that I had to unlearn. Somewhere I picked up the thought that anger was wrong, or that it was wrong to show emotions in general. And so I think the Lord re-taught me that. And he showed me how, if I'm a disciple of Christ, then I should be aiming to look like Christ, to image him in my emotions as well. And when we look at Christ, he shows a plethora of emotions, and he shows anger as well. So yeah, we definitely felt a lot of anger.
Davis's.
Anger isn't an emotion I resonate with towards God, not because it's not there somewhere, but I've had a hard time, I read the script, like, what Danielle said about being able to voice that has been hard for me. I think it goes more towards others, or maybe just being angry, but I don't necessarily I'm fairly new, I guess, in grief, but I feel like I haven't gotten to the stage of being angry, but I have been disappointed. So I've brought my disappointments to God, and I've felt freedom to bring my disappointments. So.
Yeah, I would equal that. I don't know, can't recall any moments where I've actually like lashed out at the Lord. I have had moments of sensing that I maybe wanted to, but didn't. I didn't act on it. Why that is, I don't really have an answer for that. But I do, I do remember a lot of times of just crying out to God, just going, God, help me to understand why. And then, every time, the beauty of that is that every time that I did do that, he would show me eternity. He'd show me the eternal picture and what his plan's doing, where she's at in that haven. Like Danielle said, like Chase skips the line. Like Haven did the same, and he talks about that in how that in Ecclesiastes, where he's like our children are not subdued to the evil that's done under the sun. Praise the Lord for that. I mean, look at the world we're living in right now and the evils that we see. It's like, so I've gotten to be able to just kind of cry out to him, I guess. And then I've been receiving a lot of that kind of vision from the Lord. I believe the Lord has given me that, as just bringing back to mind where she is and whom she's with. And it just makes me cry. I mean, cry tears of joy and tears of just thankfulness in some ways.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think anger could be a gift that I haven't been able to experience. So I wonder, just on my grief journey, if that will be something, because I think I feel the freedom to be angry with God. I don't know that I'm always in touch with my emotions. So it can be a release, and not that you're, but it can be a real moment to have a depth with the Lord that maybe I just haven't experienced yet.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just within that, Danielle, because that's something I can relate with. I hear the statement, "Hey, God can take it." And I'm like, well, this is we're kind of breaching on some dangerous ground here. So, what was that? As you said, that was something you kind of struggle with as well, as like kind of getting to a point of actually allowing yourself to express, whether it's disappointment, but for you specifically, like anger. How did you kind of combat that? How did you combat that? Overcome that hesitancy, maybe that fear of, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to do this.
I think that came through encouragement from other people. I remember in that season, I called it brain dumping on people. Because I was pregnant, I got pregnant with Cal a month in. I was so like overly aware of trying to fight for health in mind and body and emotions. Because my midwife had told me, like, that'll be good for the baby. And so I was constantly telling people, like, here's what I'm thinking. Is this true? I'm telling myself that God allowed my son to die because of my sin. And people are like, no, that's not true. Or I tell them, I think it's a sin for me to be angry. And someone would have to say, no. And so I think it was those outside voices from family and friends that pushed me to what was actually true in Scripture, so that I could deal with the Lord in a healthy and authentic way.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. Sherwoods, what about you guys? Just, what was it as far as your expression of emotions, towards God? What was that like?
First.
Yeah, I felt, I think, all kinds of things. I especially felt powerless. And I remember experiencing a lot of anger towards God because I felt like he was trying to teach me a lesson. And I really was like, God, are you this power hungry that you want me to really, really, really know that if you do give me a child, it's from you and not anything that I could have done? Or so I really wrestled with his character, and also really felt like it felt cruel. And I just had a hard time understanding how a loving God would allow our babies to be taken from us. Mm-hmm. So I think just journaling that was really helpful, as well as sharing that with some other believers that could help listen to me. And not, even though I knew that wasn't true, I kind of just needed to be able to sit in that, and just being around other believers that had space for that, and didn't feel the need to like correct how I felt, because I knew the truth, but it didn't feel like the truth was matching my experience. So I did feel freedom to do that. It wasn't fun or pleasant, but I did thankfully have communities to support me in that.
We'll start with yep. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and I would just say, I felt a lot of anger. I just didn't understand. I think, like, Ben, you were sharing, just like I didn't understand why, and it just didn't really make a lot of sense. So I kept trying to ask that. Like, I theologically know God is good and He's in control, but it was really hard to say that because of the experiences that we were having. And so, I kind of was like, you know what, like, I am so, like, just feel like so done. And so I remember just like not wanting to read my word, just like I did not want to like commune with God at all. I was like, man, I feel like putting God on trial. Like, why would you do this? I don't understand. Like, this nightmare. Can I wake up from it? Like, can we like go back 24 hours, or can we go back 3 months? And it was just really, really tough. And I think eventually when I started reading my Bible again, because I was kind of like, well, God, you are bigger than me. So I ended up going to Job, and I had kind of sparsed through Job at different times in my life when I was younger, because I had been told by pastors it was something good to read. And, I didn't come to know the Lord till I was a teenager. So I kind of sparsed through it, but then I really dug into it. And I think it was just really encouraging to see like how much Job puts God on trial and the things that he said. And I'm like, yeah, I feel a lot of this stuff. And it kind of gave me the freedom to start to feel that more, because before that, and like the months before that, yeah, I was angry at God, but I was angry in a way that I was like, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm just going to get really numb to this. And I'm just going to like act like this is not, I'm just going to be the Walking Dead. Like, that's the way Adrian would describe me at the time, is I was like the Walking Dead, just because I was like, I'm just going to go through the motions of life, and just get from point A to point B. But then it was like when I was seeing it in God's word and even understanding it more, I'm like, but God doesn't necessarily rebuke Job's like anger. He just was kind of like, you don't understand. And so I had to get to a place where, you know, like Danielle was sharing, I just had to, I think that's what God was teaching me is like, hey, you're not always going to understand why. Like why I can't, and I'll never understand why. I'm never going to understand why on this side of eternity. And I believe, you know, we'll get to see our babies one day as well. But I just don't think I'll ever understand why. I still don't understand why. I'm like, why did that these things have to happen? But I don't have to understand why, because I'm not big enough to have that. It would blow my mind. I couldn't literally handle it, I don't think. So yeah, just I'm rambling. My wife told me to stop talking.
Well, this question for all of you, but we'll kick back it up with you. We'll start back with you, Danielle. So how has this loss, this tragedy, affected your walk with Jesus?
I think it's been in waves, I think. Actually, a few months before Chase passed, a friend of mine had encouraged me to just spend time like believing that God was who he said he was, and that I was who he said he was, or I was who he said I was. Yeah. And so I think that actually was a weird like cushion almost to when this tragedy hit, because I felt like I had something to kind of fall back on, which was, no, I've been practicing in my mind and reminding myself, you are good, so I guess I'm going to go back to that. I also weirdly, exactly a month before, February 23rd, I had just finished reading Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place, and in it, she's telling the story about the Holocaust and the concentration camp she went to, or she was forced into. She says there are no what's in the will of God. And so I think that was another kind of cushion that the Lord maybe gave me to fall back on, because I really wanted to play what if games. I wanted to blame myself, and I wanted to blame God. I wanted to blame Tashi, I wanted to blame doctors. I had all this like blame gaming I wanted to play. But those two things became cushions, and they kind of became the constant cushions in my walk with Jesus throughout the past 7 years. The holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, like there are very charged days on the calendar. And on those days, I'm still very, very sad, obviously. I think there's still a lot of just like that confession of not understanding. Like, I just don't understand why you let this be in my story. And here we go again, another Mother's Day where Chase is not with me, another Christmas that he's not going to be. Like, that's really, really hard. It's really hard. It's really sad. And in those spaces, when I can't read my word and when I don't, and when I can't pray, I think I still trust and believe that God's got me anyway. I think he's still holding on to me, even though I might not be holding on to him. And so I think it's come in seasons. There are some seasons where I'm way more in my word and digging deep. And there are other seasons where I'm not. And it's just kind of a me and the Holy Spirit moment. One thing that the Lord has used that's been really healing, especially in seasons where I can't read my word or I'm not getting into it as much, is music. And just a lot of lyrics from songs we sing at church and stuff became so much more real in grief. And I would almost be mad about that, like singing, it is well with my soul. And I'd be like, I do not want to know how well it is with my soul. Like, I'm freshly aware of this deep, excruciating pain of losing a child. Yet I can still say it is well with my soul. And I would almost get mad at the level of understanding I now had. A girlfriend of mine used to say the Lord teaches us stuff in the classroom and sometimes on a field trip. And I would just be mad that I had to learn it on the field trip. I was like, how come you can just teach me this in the classroom? Why did I have to go through losing a child to really know how well it is with my soul? Or to really know, that you're not going to leave me. So, yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. Dave, this is for you guys. How's this loss shaped your walk with Jesus?
Yeah, I think you know, as of recently, I've just been in my walk with the Lord of asking the question, is Jesus precious to me? Like, is he precious enough? It's been a litmus test of my faith. There's been moments where I've questioned even my own faith and doubt of my Christian walk and the realness and the truth of God's Spirit living in me. And am I truly saved? Am I truly a child of God? Or am I just acting this thing out, you know, and going with emotions and doing the Christian thing? Or is he actually really precious to me? And man, it's like so many hard days, and we have loss, and he takes things, he gives good things, and you know, it's like, is he really precious to us? You know, as Christians, is he really, you know, everything that is near and dear to us? And I think if that's, you know, in this time of loss, it's been one of the greatest journeys, I think, for me in this, is that, you know, really growing to see him as a precious treasure to my soul, to my life, and to others, and to people in this world. And so, yeah, I think, I mean, it's to me, I think the change has been quite positive, because I haven't felt him as precious as he is now prior to losing Haven. It's just not the same.
I guess so. The first thing I noticed about my walk was that I'm instantly understanding so much more of Jesus's anger that took him to the cross, and the passion of wanting to do away with death connected to me on a whole new level. So my relationship with Jesus in that way really improved. I just really felt like he empathized with me deeply. And then there was a direct line to heaven now, it felt like, because my daughter is in heaven, and it just, not that there wasn't always a direct line ever since, you know, he saved me, but it just felt tangible and real. And I felt the freedom to, you know, because at first I felt guilty, like, oh shoot, maybe I just really love my daughter, and it's not about longing for heaven for Jesus, it's just for her. But I just felt freedom in exploring that more, of like, he knows that tangible person, you know, he knows that that's what we're going to connect to, and he's the author of it all, and it's okay, because we, you know, when we see him face to face, it's like when you're pregnant and you don't see that baby yet, and then you see them, like when she came out, my love for her like increased like crazy. And then I also have just felt so much freedom to be just like a daughter and not be like a religious person. I never saw myself as like a religious, you know, person, but I think just there's levels of like realization that you know, we all are probably still struggling to prove ourselves to God, even if we believe and know in our mind that we aren't. So I think this just exposed a new level of that to me, and just giving me more freedom to just literally be like, okay, I don't want to read my Bible today, but God loves me just the same. And I can just cry and be a mess. And that's honoring to him, because it's honoring how he made me, and that he just cares, and he's just with me. I can just be with him and just be present. So that's been a gift for me.
Can I jump on and second all that Shiva said? I completely agree with the I resonate with the longing for heaven. Like, I never gave heaven so much thought until Chase passed. And I remember thinking like, oh, I do want you, Jesus, but I really want Chase. And the Lord had to kind of reorient my heart for heaven. And just like you said, you also learn like that complete disdain for sin and death. Like, you just start to hate it. Something else you said, sorry, I'm jumping in, that was something I wanted to also add. I feel like the Lord exposed a lot of self-righteousness in me in that season. and two things. I would look at other people and I'd go, well, they feed their baby this and they did this. I would think that I have earned right to have my child with me because of the choices that I made. I breastfed this long and I gave him this kind of food. And so I had self-righteousness in that area, but also I was self-righteous in different choices that people would make just in life. I've always been like, I don't understand why you would be an alcoholic. Why do you need drugs? But in that season, I completely got it. Like I completely get, like, depending on how your story is written and the pain and hurt you feel. If I got pregnant with Callan, I always say he saved my life. I do not know what drug of choice I would have gone to. I completely get wanting to numb the pain and not feel, because life hurts, it's heavy, it's painful. And so the Lord, I think, exposed and started to peel out some of that self-righteousness as well.
Thanks for sharing, Danielle. Yeah. Sherwood, what about you guys? How's this, your loss has shaped your walk with Jesus?
Yeah, I think for me, I would say I resonate with, what you guys all are sharing too about, I think, just longing more for heaven. And I think like it was just more like having like a true like understanding of just like what the hope of heaven really means, because now I've experienced such a great loss in my life, and I'm like, man, like the hope of heaven isn't just something I've learned in a classroom anymore. It's like I'm learning this, like Danielle, you said, I love that analogy, on a field trip. I don't want to, but this is something that I really think God had given me. And then the other thing that I would say is just I would truly start to understand like why people, or why there's that scripture that says it's better to be in a house of mourning than a house of feasting, because we had so many people that loved us so well during that season, and that like then I think has allowed me to be like, wow, like, man, like this is something that God has allowed in my life for whatever reason, but now even on the other side of this, just being like not afraid to do things that others did for us during the time by like sitting with us and just like hearing us, and not forgetting about our babies and bringing it up and saying them by name because we named them. And so I just think like God has really just showed me the power of community and the power of people who are just be willing to sit with you.
Yeah, I think two things. One was I kind of grew up hearing about common grace and how God gives for even unbelievers who don't acknowledge him, and he gives grace. And I think I looked around at my circle of believers and unbelievers, and probably with some self-righteousness was like, wait a minute, like they lived together before they got married. They didn't have a miscarriage and they had a baby. And I remember having a friend from high school who literally was like so set on never having kids. Like ever since we were teenagers, she was like, I don't ever want kids. They're just like, quote unquote, like they're just a ball of flesh. Like I don't, whatever. And I remember a couple months after we would have had our babies after their due dates, she had a baby. And I'm like, I always have wanted to be a mom, always, since I was like 12 years old. And this girl who, claims she never wanted them, like, God, how do you choose? How do you do this? And I think just being reminded that, like, even to those who do not acknowledge him, he gives good gifts. And I just thought, like, yeah, that just changed my perspective on that. And then the second thing I was going to say is, being that I long to be a mother for as long as I can remember, I really, really remember after the second loss, really wondering, like, are we ever going to be able to have children of our own biologically? And I would have these sweet moments of surrender where I was like, Lord, like, you are my reward. Like, whether you grant this desire in my heart or not, like, you are my reward. And I will follow you no matter whether that's a yes or a no. And I think that was just such a sweet place of surrender, of just like, God, you are good. And ultimately also trusting that having children wasn't going to solve my life, and that I couldn't put having kids on this pedestal. And for those of you who don't know, we were able to welcome our Harrison in December of 2019, which was just a beautiful celebration. And also having those that had pressed in with us during the grief to be able to celebrate with us when he arrived. And I won't get into that, but it was just an amazing God story the whole way. And after our first baby was due December 3rd, and we got pregnant, and Harrison was due December 4th, which was exactly basically a year after. And so anyways, God's fingerprints and hands were just on all of Harrison's coming to be in life. And so that was also just a beautiful representation, but also realizing like God was good, and he's all we need, even when when our longings go unmet, and just trusting that he would keep me no matter what.
That's just a good word. It's good news. It's kind of what Danielle was even saying, I guess, of even when we're not fighting, it's like he holds us. It's kind of and Jesus said, everybody's put into my hand, no one can snatch them away from me, even ourselves. I can't jump out of the hand. It's like, man, thank God, so just a blessed assurance, so thanks for sharing that. Danielle, a question that my wife she wanted to ask you, and she said, how do you avoid now parenting in fear?
Ooh. I don't know, by God's grace. I think, so I had 2 miscarriages before Chase. And so all of his pregnancy, I mean, to be graphic for the, I won't be graphic. You're constantly checking your underwear, right, after a miscarriage. So there's a constant fear. And so I lived in that constant fear during Chase's pregnancy. And then when he was born, it just felt like, okay, you're here. I'm going to enjoy every moment I get with you. Then he passes, and a hurricane hits, and life is turned upside down. So I think because the Lord had to teach me that the Lord numbers our days, and that He's the one that's in control of my kids' days, literally. That load is not for me to carry. My counselor in that season gave me Psalm 131. It talks about, it's really short. It's one of the David Psalms of Ascent. But Psalm 131 talks about, I will not concern myself with things too great and too lofty, too high for me. I will basically focus and concern myself with the things that I can control. So I think Psalm 131 has been how I'm able to parent not out of fear. Because I think I believe the facade that I was in control of Chase's days. I thought, well, if I breastfeed him, if I do all the tummy time, if I do all the things, I took all my vitamins when I was pregnant, I thought I was in control of the number of his days. And then he passes, and the Lord shatters that and helps me see you were never in control. And so I think there just came a choice. Do I want to parent out of knowing that God's in control of your days, children? Or do I want to parent out of the idea that I think I'm still in control? And I think I've just had to resolve I'm not in control. And so I have Jaden, and he's now 10 years old. Callan, who is the baby I got pregnant with after Chase passed, he is now 6. And then Kai, a 4th little boy, he's 4. And so it's just a constant daily walk of going, okay, God is in control. He numbers your days. So help me, God, by your strength to parent out of fear. Now, of course, there are days where it's terrifying. I ended up having Group B strep with Chase, and I found out I had it again with Callan, and I broke down because anything that seemed similar to what happened in Chase's life, I thought was a guaranteed prescription that was going to happen in Callan's. And I was like, well, Chase didn't make it after 1 year, so Callan won't either. And so I think it was through, again, friends and family who were constantly helping me to check my mind, help me to move forward, not in anxiety, not in fear, but in hope, and then just a firm foundation that God's got me and God's got my kids.
It's almost like God's sovereign and we're in control, or God's sovereign and we're responsible. So it's that we're still making this decision, a decision to believe. You can believe Psalm 131, but also He's got to hold you. So it's probably kind of in sum, that's really what the fighting for faith is. But let me end with just one question for all of you guys, and this is something that I think can be helpful for all of us. If you've experienced loss, and then how people follow up with you. So, are there statements? What are statements people have made that make you feel impaired, and then what are the ones that make you feel cared for?
I can go on for a very long. Anybody else want to take that one first? I have a lot of ideas.
Can I just clarify what you mean by impaired?
Yeah, maybe resent. I mean, the emotions chart, BD. I mean, come on, what are you doing? So
the impairment emotions. I got you.
I just gave you toxic shame right there. See that? Sir?
Oh man,
I'm
so shame right now. Oh
yeah, I mean, it makes you feel resentful, maybe toxic, shame. Some kind of something like that on the.
Everything happens for a reason.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah, that was kind of good one to bring up.
Everything happens for a reason. One time I had a friend who said, when I told her, she said, "You can adopt me." I was like, what? What else? I think,
you can have some.
I think just especially with miscarriages, just people, like even now that we have, Harrison here with us, I still don't feel like it was my first Mother's Day, so I think acknowledging those that have lost babies, that we're still parents, without them being physically here with us. I don't know, I could think of a lot more, but those are just some that come to mind. Something that was really helpful was when someone would ask, "How is today?" Because every day was so different through the grief process. And sometimes "how are you" feels too, or even "how are you in this hour?" because it just changed so much. So how is today was helpful. And then just like thinking, like calling the babies by their name, thinking of, Noah or Angel was our two. And just, I think just listening and being willing to hear the pain and the experience. Well, after we lost our first, I think all I wanted to do was just like invite others into that space with me. And so like reliving it, which is hard to ask other people to do, but there were many who had space for that with me, and I could like describe the emotions, the surroundings, the feelings, the words, and help me not feel so alone, and that maybe people were experiencing that with me. So those were just some things that came to mind.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with those. People seem to feel the need, and I've done a couple of workshops where I teach about my story, and I have these practical encouragements that I give to people, and I decided whether I'm talking to those who are on the side or on the path of suffering, or for those who are on the sidewalk of suffering. Mm-hmm. And I just noticed that it seems that people on the sidewalk just feel like they have to say the perfect thing. And the perfect thing doesn't exist. That's what I tell people. So yeah, people say dumb stuff, and it's so unhelpful. All the things that she said about you can have another baby, or all things happen for a reason. Sometimes even offering like scriptures at the wrong time can be abrasive. Like I did not want to hear on March 24th that all things are done for the good of the. I didn't want to hear that on that day. I didn't want to hear, honestly, in Romans about things we experience today are light and momentary compared to what we're going to get in heaven. I get it. That is a needed truth. I do want to hear that eventually. But on March 24th, I don't want to, that's not helpful, because what I'm going through does feel like, and does not feel momentary. Tadashi, being kind of a quote unquote public figure, he got a lot of stupid stuff said to him on Twitter. People just, saying he's in the Illuminati and that's why his son passed away. We had a woman actually come to our house a few days later, and she said, I wish you called me. I could have raised Chase from the dead. None of that was helpful. That it just added steam to what was already really excruciating. So I had to learn that people are well-intentioned, like they have good intentions, but they will mess up. But on the other, like, people would say dumb things, but sometimes people didn't say anything, and that hurt too, depending on who it was. If you were real close to me and you were a close friend and you went silent in that season, that really, really hurt. And there was actually work to be done to restore some of those relationships later, because it felt like in the moment I needed you, you went dark and you left me. And maybe they did that out of their own fear, like, I don't know what to say. But I always encourage people, fear, give fear making the mistake. Like, you're not going to say the perfect words, okay, but try. Don't try to say the perfect words. Just try to support your grieving friend in some way. And that's knowing when to say something, and that's knowing when not to. And so that's one of the things that really was helpful to us, was people kind of gauging, is today a good day to speak, or is today a good day to sit next to you and just be present as you cry? Do you want to just look at pictures of Chase today? I love how you said that how are you can be a harsh question. I totally agree. How are you became, again, I love the word abrasive. It felt so abrasive and loaded. I love that how is today. Especially when how are you came in a text form, just a random how are you text. That was so never helpful. That just hurt. So people learning knowing when to be silent, knowing when to talk. What was also helpful for us was people learning to ask good questions. I feel like people really want to help and say, like, let me know if you need anything. And I think what would have been more helpful is for someone to actually offer something tangible and practical. Can I bring you a meal on Tuesday? Was way more helpful for us than someone saying, let me know, because I didn't have the energy to even think through what I needed. So it would be really helpful if someone else thinking through, your kids need to eat. Can I bring you a meal? Celebrating Chase with us was really helpful. Saying his name, remembering him, not being afraid to bring him up. Like, that is like I mentioned, it's just a huge life-giving thing for me. Like, I want you to talk about Chase, and I want you to remember him with me. Yeah, so those are some of the unhelpful and helpful things that we experience.
I would second everything y'all said. Definitely the saying the name is helpful, and just talking about whoever, I guess for us, talking about Haven and being able to just say it and not, worry if it's going to make me sad, because it acknowledges the life that is still there, I believe, just not with us here. And so it's like, it gives a joy, because you're still being able to experience your child and and have your child in conversations and talking about your child. And the mom's always going to be sad, or the dad, anyone that lost any person. If their person has received the loss that's heavy, then they're going to just be sad. So you saying something about them isn't going to make them more sad. It just might may cause tears, and that's okay. It's a gift. And so that, talking about them, I think the hard things would be, like she said, not saying anything at all, but just questioning how you're grieving or your timeline for grief, and by now you should be here, or even just saying things that imply that you think. And it's hard because we're all going to mess up, because it's just hard, to say the perfect thing, but like, you're still, I didn't realize you were still this sad. So that hurts, because you feel like, oh gosh, pressure's on, I got to get over this at some point. And you believe that lie that there's a timeline to grieving. I think.
And there's not a timeline to grieving.
And then finally, the but God statements. I think that they're wonderful, and it's biblical to bring hope and light to, the hard things. But like, I think this is why it's so hard, because it's like the timing of it, like saying, gosh, that was so sad, but God's going to do this and this and this through that. Just being really, sensitive about saying that too quickly, because it almost like takes away from like just pausing and just sitting with it. Because I think as a griever, we already feel like that pressure to like perform, or like we feel that pressure to not just be a mess. So then when our friends are saying like, but God, you're like, okay, I'll get my act together. But it's so messy. It's so hard. I feel for my friends, and like, just say something.
I just wanted to hop in and say, I think kind of what we're all sharing here too. I think just like also just being okay to be silent and not have to, like, I think what you just said, Laura, about the but God thing, is a lot of times we want to like insert something that's like positive or hopeful or, this or that. But it's just like something that was really helpful when someone just would just like let me tell my story. And then we'd be okay to just sit in silence. And it was because it is really sad. I mean, it's tragic. And so I think just that presence that people would give is just, I think that sometimes was just so helpful for me to know I'm not alone.
Can I add to that? Because it hits on so many things that I've had to learn. I did find, and it felt like oftentimes it was church people who were doing those who did but God statements. And it seemed like they were trying to pull me too quickly out of my pain and out of my grief. And then eventually I found this book by a professor named Soong Chan Ra called Prophetic Lament. And he does a whole treatment of the book of Lamentations. It's a great book if you add it to your list. But in it, he talks about how, particularly in the West, in the Western American church, we have a very triumphant narrative where we're just used to things like being celebratory and things going our way and, having things happen the way we want them to. And he does some research that talks about 90+% of the songs we sing in worship services are like praise and celebratory songs. But if you look in the Psalms, 40% of the Psalms are lament songs. They are psalms that come out of that deep, deep sorrow and deep, deep pain. And our singing in churches just doesn't match that. So we haven't really, as a church, practiced the skill of lament. And he calls lament the language of suffering, and he calls praise the language of celebration. And so we're just really heavy on the praise side. And I think because of that, we want to pull people too quickly out of the suffering because we believe the lie that we're like supposed to live in this celebratory way. Now, joy and sorrow can coexist at the same time. And so I think one thing I always want to push people towards is not being afraid to let their grieving friend lament, but also for their own self is growing in their own philosophy and understanding of what it means to lament. I don't know how often you spend time reading Lamentations, but it's necessary. It is needed for the church. And he reminds us in the book that the gospel actually exists at this intersection between deep, deep pain and great, great celebration. But when we lose one side, we're not embracing the fullness of our gospel. And so it is an encouragement I push people towards often. Learn to lament. Learn to speak the language of pain and suffering. We do not have to be afraid that God gave us a whole book in the scriptures. We see Christ doing it. I do think as a church, if we can learn to do that better, we will be able to come alongside those brothers and sisters within the church that are suffering in a way more helpful and supportive way.
Just one last question from my wife here.
So tell us how to ask about a child you've lost in a way that honors you and doesn't, like, is there like a warning shot we fire? Like, hey, we want to know you. We want to know your heart. How, asking after you about, like, what if you weren't trying to think about that that day? Or like, what if we forced you into these emotions you weren't trying to have? Like, you're like, I just didn't want to do, like, how do we ask? I don't know how to ask you about your child in a way that's honoring of you. I don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you're going to say a question that might push someone into a space of emotion that they weren't currently in. So some part of that's going to be on you being willing to take the risk, and you might put your foot in your mouth. And if the relationship is strong, it can handle the mess up. But for me personally, especially in those early days of pain and sorrow, I found that someone asking, do you want to talk about Chase today? Or would you like to share something that you're thinking about Chase today? Like giving permission to, or asking for the door to be open versus assuming that I want the door to be open, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's great. Go ahead, Ben.
No, I was going to say that, Cara, I have had really just deep thankfulness when people have reached out and just said, you know, I really miss Haven. I'm missing Haven today with you. You know, I've had people, you know, say that, just like, it really shows me that people, they mourn with those who mourn. It's like when your brothers and sisters come in and there's a mourning with you, it's a beautiful thing, and it doesn't have to be like conversational transaction. It just needs to be relational, you know, and saying like, I really miss her with you, and man, you know, I just miss her, and that's it, you know. And those moments I've had the most profound, like, awe and wonder of like the brotherly and sisterly in Christ relationship, you know, moments that I've had in a long time, if ever, you know, just going like, man, this is really, I'm really thankful for this relationship, and thankful that they would reach out and say, you know, I'm missing Haven with you, you know. So
that's really good. I think how questions can be helpful, like, how can I support you today? Or how can I remember Haven with you today? I don't know. I feel like it kind of goes back to that learning how to ask good questions, because I think the hope what you're trying to do is come alongside and support in some way the suffering other. So just learning how to ask those questions, or say things like, can you expound upon something you said yesterday? Or would you help me understand? That's what I learned in counseling, is the help me understand, you know, whatever. And that opens the door to conversation.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I think every friend's different, but I feel like overall, I could be wrong, but I feel like people just need to talk about it. So I don't know. That's for me anyways. But like, so just closing it in is just, I don't know. It's just healing to have a chance to talk about it. So what you were saying, questions that spark ability to talk about it, and just having that freedom just to open up the conversation.
Yeah, just like you said, even if someone came up to me and said, tell me about what Chase did when he was teething, like, that is so exciting. I want to tell you. Tell me about Chase when you were pregnant with Chase. Yes, please, I will. Because you do want to talk about your child. You want to have someone celebrate, remember him too.
Well, guys, I just appreciate your vulnerability, even just kind of sharing I mean, even just this last question is so helpful. I mean, obviously I have people I love on this phone call, and it's just helping me know how to be a better brother, and probably even feeling some of my guilt of not being a good brother in some of these questions, or maybe lack thereof. So Danielle, thank you so much for your vulnerability and just sharing this story. Obviously I grieve, for you, just that you have to have this story. I wish you didn't. So, but thank you so much for sharing it. And again, Davis's, Ben, Laura, Sherwood's, Chris, Adrian, thank you guys so much for jumping on and being vulnerable as well. So, and just being examples, all of you, just for, this is a loss, and but you're fighting for faith. It's just to see how you've made a choice, but also our sweet King has held you too. So just thank you for sharing that. So.
Thank you all, and thank you, Danielle, for sharing, and thank you everyone for your, sharing your story, and I feel for your losses as well.
Yes, thank you. I second that. Thank you, Danielle, so much for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah. Well, guys, y'all have a wonderful night. Bless y'all. Sherwood, Davis, to see you soon enough. Danielle, thank you again. Good night.
Good night.
Night.